Hi, welcome back to another React Three Fiber tutorial. Let's take a look at the project we're going to build today. This is kind of a cyberpunk dossier of different characters in our imaginary cyberpunk universe, and it's called the Cedric Compromised Entity Directory for Regional Intercorporate Network. Very scary sounding organization, but basically what we have here is just some bio text down the left-hand column, an image of the character on the right-hand column, and then a couple of very simple controls to switch between characters. And so I put about 5 different characters in here with some sample bios and stuff, and also this loader we're going to build. But the purpose of this tutorial is to learn about the post-processing library that is available by the same people that created React Three Fiber itself. And it's called React PostProcessing, and we're going to take a look at it a little later here. But it's a very powerful tool for doing all sorts of awesome effects on your React Three Fiber scenes. So with that said, let's get started. Before we get into the coding portion of this tutorial, I want to show you how I generated the images for the project. And the way that I generated the images was with Stable Diffusion and the automatic GUI. It's really quite powerful. It's kind of amazing how much you can do with it. This is an example of one of the prompts that I used to generate one of the characters. It's pretty simple. It's cyberpunk hacker girl wearing a plastic hood and combat boots and a couple other things that I just found by experimenting with it that work well. And with that, you can get one of our character images. This one is using the seed that I used when I generated the original image, but I can turn the seed back to random, and I could just keep running this and getting totally different characters. And I was surprised the percentage of them that came out really cool. Every once in a while, you'll get some weird, bizarre after effects where like things are obviously not right, but for the most part, it works really, really, really well. The model that I used to generate these characters in particular is actually a combination of 2 different models, the Anything v3 model, and there's a Tron Legacy style model. And then in the checkpoint merger tool in the automatic UI, I combined them with the primary model being Anything, and then the secondary model being Tron Legacy. And then for the multiplier, I set it to be mostly the primary model here. So this weight, the smaller it is, the higher percentage of the model is based on the primary model. So this one is 85% Anything v3 and then 15% Tron Legacy. I mean, there might be better settings. I experimented a little bit, but one of the cool things about Stable Diffusion is there's kind of an infinite amount of space to play around and get different results. So yeah, so this is what I used to generate all of the characters. I think, in this particular tutorial, there's about 5 of them, but I made a whole bunch of different ones. I'm not sure what I'm going to use them all for yet, but I think it'd be a really cool way to make a game, especially like a visual novel style game where you can just use 2D art for everything. Yeah, so something cool to play around with, and that using these images for the tutorial would be a great use. All right, so now let's go jump into the code and start writing this up from scratch. We can start with this React Three Fiber starter kit that I have up on Code Sandbox. If you are a complete beginner to React Three Fiber and you want to learn about some of the basics, I have some other videos on fundamentals that would be worth checking out. In this video, we really just want to focus on the post-processing. So let's just start here. I'll put a link to the starter kit in the video, and from that link, you'll just be able to hit work here, and it'll create your own copy of the starter kit that we can rename to whatever we want. So I'm just going to call mine Cedric. You can call yours something that makes sense to you. And then I'm going to clean out some of the stuff that we don't really need here. So in this particular project, it comes with this rotating cube, and the idea there is just to sort of give users a little bit of boilerplate for some of the features of React Three Fiber, but we're not going to need any of this. So I'm going to remove the scene, which will leave us with just an empty canvas here. And then we can also clean up some of these imports that we don't need. We'll leave React 3 Drei in here because we're about to use it in a second. Then once we get to this point, we'll just have an empty scene, and this can be our starting place for moving forwards. So an obvious place to start for our project is probably just getting the text added in. A big portion of this project is all of the text that we're rendering to the screen. And the way that we're going to do that is by using a component that's in the Drei package. And Drei, if you've never used it before, is a bunch of helpers and abstractions that make working with React Three Fiber really convenient. They have different types of 3D controls that you can use. They have little widgets that you can use to change the parameters of a scene. And they have a bunch of little wrappers around geometry and shapes and stuff, like a plane, a box, sphere, things like that. The ones that we're going to be interested in today are two of them. There's a text abstraction and an image abstraction. So let's go take a look at the docs for those two. And we'll find that they're actually really easy to use. The image is really straightforward. We can literally just provide it a URL prop and then a path to the file that we're going to use. And the text is also pretty easy. We can set a color. We can set some alignment props that tell the component how to align the text within its bounding box. And we can even give it a font. So with that said, let's start there. Let's create our first text component. So going back into the code, we need to import text from React 3 Drei. And let's just add it with all defaults first. So we add a text node. And then give it some text. We'll see it appear on the screen. And by default, it's appearing right in the center of the scene, which is the coordinates 0, 0, 0. This is our title text, so we can actually bring this up to the top now. And it uses the same prop as every other component in React Three Fiber for positioning. So it's just position, and then an array of three-dimensional coordinates. So if we put 0, 0, 0 in there, it's going to just stay in the same place. If we want to move it around, we could bring it to the left. We could bring it up or down, rather. Let's put this up in the top center, like this. And then we can also, while we're in here, set this anchor to be center so that it's just aligning itself to the center. And there's also another prop that's useful if we want to center text called text align, and we can also make that center. And then once we do that, everything should be in the center here. There's some other props that we can use, like font and font size. We'll set the font at the end. For now, we don't really need to worry about that, but we could do the font size now just to get an idea for how that works. It just takes a number and you can see like what different numbers correspond to you in terms of size by just sort of adjusting it a bunch. Let's stick with that for now. We'll tweak everything at the end once we have all of the text in. All right, so that's our title for the page. Next, let's get into creating some of the text for the character bio information. Okay, so let's get into creating the text that actually makes up the character bio. And the thing about this text is that it's dynamic, right? So we want it to change when we change characters. To make that work, let's start by writing up our character bios in a data structure that we can actually switch around in. So I'm going to create a constant called characters. We'll make this an array, and it's going to be an array of objects, and then all of the fields in this object are all of the dynamic pieces of information that we need to render a character. So what do we need? We need an image. I'm just going to call that mugshot, and we'll just put this in here for now. These file names can be whatever you call your files, but I'm going to just number mine so they're in order. And then I'm going to give every character an ID just to sort of give it that flavor of being some kind of a weird futuristic corporate database. Everything needs to have a big old long ID in the future, so we'll do that. And these IDs that I'm using, I just generated with a UID generator. If you go on Google and search for like UID generator, you'll get a tool that will just pump out these UIDs for you. So I'm gonna have an ID, a character is gonna have a name, and so for our first one, my character's name is Grace Arbor, and she is a courier. So we're gonna give, first of all, class human, just to sort of imply that, you know, there are things other than humans in this world. And occupation is going to be courier. And the employer could be, I don't know, something cool for a corporation. In the finished project, I used North Pacific Parcel Corporation. I guess I'm kind of implying that this particular cyberpunk setting is sort of like a West Coast sort of thing, but you can make yours whatever you want. So, okay, I've got an employer, and then the bio is this whole paragraph of text, and I don't really want to rewrite this, so I'm going to just copy what I had earlier here. Oh, and another thing to note is that if you just make this a regular string, in fact, I'll show you what happens if we just make it a regular string. It's going to ignore new lines. So, oops. What's our issue here? Oh, so yeah, we want to be able to have new lines in our strings. So I'm going to use the sort of backtick quotations. Then also it's going to render this white space if we leave it in here. So if you remove this white space, then this will actually allow the text to be rendered with the new lines as they are here. So we can kind of control the line breaks and make the width of the text work the way we want. Okay. So now that we have some character information, let's figure out how to get this on the screen. Let's just start by sort of roughing it all in. So we know we're going to need at least another text node here. And if we look at our finished project real quick, just going to pull it up. You'll notice that we have the name here in a larger font with no sort of header in front of it. And then the other ones have these headers. So let's try to match that. Let's do the name first. So we could do characters 0 dot name. I just have a typo there. So let's fix that, and then you should be able to see our name show up. We're getting this error message, and it's a little weird because it's saying a component suspended while responding to a synchronous input. And this really just means that there is some kind of a promise that's being expected to resolve to render one of these components here. And it doesn't really seem obvious what that would be because we're just getting some synchronous data to render these text elements. But I happen to just know that these text elements can load like the fonts and other things from the network. And so I'm guessing that these text elements are trying to load some kind of data. And to fix this, we just need to wrap everything that might have a loading phase in it with a suspense component. And a suspense component is a part of React, and it's just a way to render some fallback UI when children components of the suspense component aren't ready to render yet. And so the suspense component has a fallback prop where we can provide it something to render and can say null. We also need to import suspense from React. Okay, finally. So once we add that suspense component, now these text components will render successfully every time. And this is good because we're definitely going to need this when we load the images, right? Because the images are going to be textures that get loaded from a static web server. And so to load the images, we're going to need this loader anyway. So might as well add it now. We're also going to be adding a custom font to all the text nodes, so we are going to need it for that as well. All right, so now that that's taken care of, we have our name. So let's figure out where we want to place this text node at here. We know we kind of want to have it be aligned along the left side of the screen so that we have room for our image. So let's try moving it around a little bit. We can go and add a position to this node as well. And for this one, let's do something like -0.2. 1, 0. Okay, it's fine for now. We'll probably have to tweak all of these later. Let's try to get a font size that works for us. we made our header 0.3, so maybe this one I'll do like 0.15 or something, about halfway as big. All right, not too bad. This header is actually pretty far down, so you know what, I'm actually going to bring this up to 3 and this up to 2 and save that. And then I'm also going to add a anchor x equals left here. Just kind of be left aligned. And that looks good to me for now. All right. So now that we have one of these, we'll notice that in all the rest of them, they're all kind of aligned in the same way. So that's handy. Now we can kind of just maybe copy this one and just use this center value in the position to start sort of bringing these down. So maybe for the next one, we'll do 1.7. Okay. And then I think we're also going to use a slightly smaller font for everything so that the name is sort of like a little more in focus there. So let's try, I'll leave that there and then just bring the font size down a little bit. So like 1.1. Cool. All right. And then instead of the name, this is the class, and then we'll give this a prefix like that. Classification. All right. So now we're kind of just chugging right along. We can do the next one, which is I'm going to do employer and occupation. So employer and occupation. And then make sure that these have a nice little offset to them. And we can just use the same difference between them all to sort of get the spacing to be nice. So maybe if this one's 1.7 and the title is 2, maybe we do a slightly smaller jump here, but we want to go down a little. So 1.5 and 1.3 maybe. Oh, sorry, 1.3. Okay, yeah, that looks all right. So that's good. And then our next section is this central index key thing. So this is almost a whole different section. So we'll do 2 text nodes, one for the header. I'll also give that a little more space here. Maybe we make this the same font size as the title or as the name. And then we do our key here. So this is coming from our array of characters. .id. Need to make sure this is got a little space here. And then I made these font sizes a little different and changed the color just to make it a little more visually interesting. I think that part could look better than it does, but it's good enough for government work. Okay, color red. Bring down the font size. Let's try to maybe have a little rhythm to the font sizes. So we'll do one here. Okay, that's fine for now. We can always tweak this at the end. Sometimes when you're designing things, you have to just sort of rough it out first, and then once everything is in position, you can come back and get all the white space and size ratios to be pretty. All right, so I think all that we have left for text is the subject, or not the subject, but kind of like the bio section here, and then our controls at the bottom. So let's do the bio text next. So we have that ready to go. Get rid of our color here and just use the default again. And then we'll bring this down a little ways. So we got the anchor left, X is left, but I think we use anchor Y is top. What that does for us is it just lets the position refer to the top of the text, and that makes our life a little bit easier here so that we can so it doesn't matter how high this text gets. Like when we are using the center anchor position, this position kind of adjusts depending on the height of the text itself, and we don't really want that for this line. It didn't make a difference on the other lines because they're only one line long, and so it's actually kind of convenient to have them be centered. But yeah, for the bio, let's use anchor Y top. And no, let's refresh this. Seems to be, okay, there we go. So now we have our color back to default again. All right. And so finally, let's just do these controls as well. We know we're going to need at least 3 more text nodes here. Start with the first one, since that's going to also be left aligned. And we can just hard code this. So this is going to say menu options. And we're going to bring this down quite a ways. Even farther, maybe. Should look like it's along the bottom of our screen, more or less. I think we could go all the way down to, well, let's see. Oh, sorry, I don't want to do that. Let's just bring this down to -2 as well. Okay, I think that's fine. Looks okay to me. I think we should also change the color of these elements just to sort of indicate that they're more like controls than informational text. Oh, that's a red color. I want sort of like a nice neon green color. So here's one that works pretty well. Yeah, that'll work. All right. And then we can just copy this twice. Make this one previous. Well, I used a short version of that, previous and next. And then we need to give those a little bit of room to breathe. So maybe something like, maybe -1. No, it looks okay. And then for this one, we can do maybe 0.5. All right, cool. All right. That's exciting. So we basically have all of our text in place, which brings us to the next section of this, which is using the image component to render the images. All right, so the first step in rendering our images is to get the static files uploaded to the web server so that they'll be available. And I'm just going to upload all of the static files that I have at once. I'll link to the GitHub so that you can download all these if you want to. Or you could try creating your own and make your own sort of story around this project. It's kind of fun just to do the writing exercise and also make your own images. I kind of tried to make a couple different like styles of people. Like I have more of the hackery type girl and like an AI person, and it's kind of like a soldier dude and a scientist, just a wide range of different characters. But we're going to upload all this. We're also going to upload these 3 fonts. At the end, we're going to use these font files to change the fonts of all the text. It just will look a little more like a terminal that way. And you can just Google this font if you want to use the same one. This is an open source Google font, so you can download these right off of Google Fonts. All right, I didn't end up using the light one, although it looks kind of cool. Let's upload it just in case if you want to use it. It actually might look better than the one I ended up picking. All right, so let's just upload all of this stuff for now. We're going to need all of them eventually. I also kept saying that I only had 5 characters in this project, but there's actually 6. So yeah. So now that we have all the image files uploaded, we can get to using them. And it's going to be real easy. We really just need to add the image component from React 3 Drei. So we'll add it to our import here on line 3. And then back down inside of our canvas and also inside of the suspense component, I'm going to put it right under the header, in fact. We can use the image. We set the source prop to be our mugshot value for the character. So that's just characters, character, 0th character, and then mugshot. Close off our, sorry, it's actually URL is the right argument there. All right, and there is our image right in the middle of the screen. It's a square and it's cut off, but it's there. So now we just need to fix those 2 issues. The first thing we'll fix is the size so that it's not cut off. And to do that, we will just go and set the scale prop. And scale is also an array. And all of these images they just happen to be basically 2 times as tall as they are wide. So as long as we set a value to be that ratio, we're going to get the image in the right size, and then we can kind of change it to make it bigger. So this looks pretty good. This is roughly the same height as the page, which is nice. We'll make it big to kind of show off our cool AI artwork. And then we need to position this somewhere better. So we'll add a position here. If I can type. And we'll make this something like 300. And that gives us a nice little spacing there. Okay. So this is coming together pretty well. We're getting close to the point where we can start talking about the post-processing effects. But before we do that, we have one more image we need to add, actually, just to kind of give things a little more depth here. And that is this sort of watermark behind the screen. I just thought this looked kind of cool. And I also generated this logo with AI, although I used the Midjourney AI that you can use in Discord. So that is already uploaded. It's just this file called ai.png. So we'll just make another image. This one we will hard code. Let's call it ai.png. And we want to make this one transparent. So to make an image transparent, first you need to set a prop on it that's just called transparent, just to make it capable of being transparent. And once you do that, then you can set an opacity value, which is just percentage. So 0.8 is mostly opaque. We can go all the way down to say 0.2, 0.1 even. And let's also center this thing. And then this is not what we want, obviously. Let's make it basically take up the whole screen. Cool. And you know what? Let's actually make let's make our character a little bit transparent as well. I just think it'll look a little better. We'll make it very opaque though. So yeah, it gives it a nice blend to the screen, a little less sharp. It'll come in handy nicely once we start doing the post-processing effects. All right, so this is basically our whole layout. And even like this, it's kind of cool, but we're essentially done with the layout. However, there is one more important thing. Like we saw, we can do this cool transition effect and switch between characters. Kind of the whole point of this is to be able to view a bunch of different characters so you can tell a story through their bios, and without that it's not quite as interesting. So let's do that next. I'm just going to copy and paste all of the bios that I've written so far. If you want to write your own, just make a copy of this object here and fill out as many of them as you have images for, basically, or as many as you want to do. Doesn't really matter how many you make. The important thing is just to have an array of objects with this shape. Okay. You also notice that these images aren't in order. That's just because I decided I wanted this character to not be the second one, because they're kind of like a weird AI thing, and I just wanted it to come up later in the order. Not a big deal, but that's why the file names aren't in order. There's no reason they need to be. These file names could be anything. It doesn't matter. All right. So now we have a whole array of images, but we're still just seeing the first one. And that's because we have this index hard-coded for all of our text and images. This character's 0 situation we got going on. This is just always going to show you the 0th item in the array. To change it, all you need to do is change this index though, right? Which means if we can change all the indexes at once, then we can flip pages. To do that, we're just going to use our basic React skills and create some state called character index and a function set character index. And then this is going to be a React use state hook. And we'll make the default 0. All right. So then now that we have this, we want to replace all of the places where we have character 0 and get every single one of them. So I'm just going to hit Control D to get them all in VS Code, and then change this 0 to char index. And if we did everything right, nothing should have broken. It should still look the same way as it did originally, except now when we come up here and change the state, the whole character bio switches. And this is how we're going to be able to flip between characters here. All right. And that brings us to the final part of page flipping, which is just calling this setCharIndex function to change the character here. So we'll change the default back to 0 so that everything starts on page 0. And then we'll go down to the text elements for our previous and next buttons. And we're going to add some click handlers here to do the changes. So let's think about the behavior we want. So for the previous button, we don't want to do anything if we're on the 0th index. But if we're on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, we want it to go back 1 until you get to 0. So let's figure out how to do that. First, we need to have an onClick handler, and that's just built in. And then this is going to be an arrow function. And then let's say we're going to call setCharacterIndex for sure. But we only want to set it if it's not 0. So we're going to use a special form of the setState function where you can actually pass a function into this function that gets past the current state. That's a little complicated, but you'll see in the example. So we could just do this. So like I could just say setCharacterIndex to 2. And then if we click on this button, it's just going to set it to 2. But that's not what we're going to do. We're actually going to do this where we put another function in as an argument, which gets the current character index. So we can, for example, check what the value of the current character index is first. So let's say if character index is, I guess if it's currently less than or equal to 0, then we just want to keep it as 0. So what this is saying, like if we click it and it's already 0, and hopefully it's never less than 0 or else things have gone wrong. But if it's currently 0, just keep it as 0. But if it's not, if it's greater than 0, then we do want to change it and we want to make it 1 less than what it currently is. So that would be character index minus 1. So that is the previous button. And then we'll come back and check this after we do the next button. For the next button, we want to do something a little bit different. We want to allow you to increment the character index up 1 until you get to the final character, right? So it's kind of like the reverse of the function we just wrote. OnClick, do another anonymous arrow function here. Set character index again. Pass in the current character index. So this time, what we want to check is the current character index greater than or equal to the length of our characters array. So this is like the total number of characters. I would just do -1 because the index is 0 indexed. So when there's 6 characters, the highest index is 5. All right. And so in this case, if this is true, then we want to actually set it to the highest index, which again is just going to be the length of the array -1. And then if it's false, we want to increment this, so +1. Okay, so now think this is good. Let's give it a test run. I'm going to refresh it first just to make sure everything is up to date. Uh-oh, so we did something wrong here. We're reading mugshot. Characters.characterindex.mugshot. Okay, so we just have a bit of a typo here. This is not where we want to close this. We need to do that at the end. And now things work correctly. All right. So now that we track down our bug, we can sort of give this a little test run, make sure everything works the way we expect. First, let's make sure our previous button doesn't break things when we try to go back from the first character. And that seems fine. One thing you'll notice as we click through is there's kind of a delay between characters, and that's because it's loading the assets. It's kind of funny. It takes a lot longer running on Code Sandbox than it does on my hosted version of this. The loader actually is pretty quick, but it's still there. In any case, one way we can make that better is just to add the loader back in, and we already have a place to put it. So let's do that real quick. So for the loader, we just need to make a new component. We'll call it constant loader. And this is just a basic React component, except we're going to animate the pyramid thing that we're spinning around. So we're going to need to do a couple of things to do that. First, we need to create a ref in React that we're going to use to attach to the geometry. And this is going to give us an address to control the animation, basically. And you'll see in a minute how that works. And then I'm going to want to create our pyramid, I think, next. So and give this, or sorry, we're going to return. Let's put all of this in a group just so if we want to add things later, we can. And then the group is going to have our ref on it. So we'll actually call this a loader ref. In React Three Fiber, a group is kind of just like placeholder node that you can put geometry in, but then you can apply transforms to the entire group. So we're going to be able to animate the rotation of this whole group, and then anything inside of it will rotate along with it. For now, let's just put a single object in here. So we're going to put a cone. Now, cone is a piece of geometry that is a part of Three.js, but we can actually get a component to wrap up the cone geometry and provide all the props for us. So we're going to import cone from Drei, and then we'll be able to use the cone. So the cone needs some arguments, and the arguments are kind of hard to know unless you know where to find them in the documentation. To find them in the documentation, the best place to actually go, in my opinion, is just to go to the Three.js docs. So if you search for Three.js docs and then in the documentation, search for the cone, you'll see this cone geometry. And the cone geometry, when you create it in Three.js, gets passed 3 arguments. And these are the same arguments that we're going to provide as an array in React Three Fiber. So we just need to figure out what are these numbers 5, 20, and 32. And that comes right here. So the cone geometry gets a radius first. It's a float, so a decimal number. A height, which is also a float. And something called radial segments, which is an integer. So this is what we really care about, because the radial segments, if they're infinite, it's a perfect cone. But if they're 3, well, it's a pyramid. So we're going to take the args here, and the first ones are going to be size related. I'm not sure what we're going to use for those yet, but for now, let's just make that 3 all the way across. And this one will make it a pyramid. The other 2 we might change. And then within here, we need to give it a material. So we'll give it a mesh Lambert material. I'm actually not sure you need to do this anymore in React Three Fiber, the attach prop, but I don't know. We can try it. And then we need to close our cone here. Okay, so now we have a loader and it's just a pyramid. Let's see what it looks like without the animation first. To use it, we're just going to replace this fallback value on the suspense component with loader component and give this a refresh. Next. And it is there. It looks kind of weird, but when we fix the rotation, everything should look cool. So let's do that next. So if you remember, we put this ref onto the group that contains the cone. And to use that ref to animate it, we can use the use frame hook from React Three Fiber. Just import that. The way that I'm importing these, by the way, in case you're not used to VS Code, is once I type this and it kind of gives you the tooltips, you can hit tab and it'll auto import it. If things aren't working and you're not sure why, you might want to make sure that it's actually imported here. So this is where it needs to be. It is an import from React Three Fiber. Once it is there, now we can go and use this hook. So React Fiber is a hook that takes a function, and this function is going to run on every frame in the scene. So we just want to start messing around with rotating our thing. So, oops, sorry. This is the name of the hook, or of the ref. So the ref is a ref to the group, and then that will let us address the current value of that group, and then its rotation, and then we can address each coordinate plane separately. So let's do 0.04 every frame maybe. So we can just increment this by 0.04. And I'll show you what it looks like with just Y. So now it's spinning horizontally. We can add X too. And give it a refresh. I'm spinning in a different axis now. And then finally, we'll also do Z. And that is how we do it. So now we're rotating on all three coordinate planes. It looks kind of neat. This is not a particularly high effort loader. This could actually be anything you can come up with. So if you want your loader to be like a spinning logo or something, you could use another image and spin it around, or I don't know. The sky's the limits. Whatever you can think up, you can do. Wow, so we more or less have a working project at this point. Every feature is implemented, all of the content's there. The only thing left to do is the fun and cool part, which is adding the post-processing effects that make it look kind of like a glitchy computer screen situation. And this is going to be pretty straightforward, actually. So to do this, we're going to use a couple of new libraries that we need to import. So first we need one called post-processing, and this contains some sort of post-processing primitives based on the Three.js shaders. And then we also need React post-processing, or React-3 post-processing. And that's it for imports. So now that we have these, we're going to bring in a couple of components and helper functions from these guys. And let's start with just the bare minimum, get started. So let's start by adding the scan lines that we have in the finished project. So if you remember in our finished project here, there's this sort of like scan line effect going across everything. Let's do that one first. This one, we just need to import two things. So we need to import something called the EffectComposer and scan lines. And then I'm going to import these from React 3 PostProcessing. And the way that you know what the names are is just to read the docs as usual. So the React post-processing docs are pretty good. They have demos of pretty much all the different effects that are built in. It also shows you how to write a custom effect using your own shader code, which is very cool and something I want to do another video about soon, but not in this one. So let's just start with, the basics, and I'll show you how to use some of the built-in ones. So to use this scan line component, we just need to add it all to our scene here. So going back down to our scene, and go all the way to the bottom. In fact, we want to do this outside of the suspense. And the reason for that is everything inside the suspense is hidden behind the loader. But if we put the post-processing effects outside, then it'll be applied to our loader too, which is what we want, because we're kind of pretending that we're viewing all of this through a real stylized, glitchy screen. So start with the EffectComposer. We can just put that in blank. And then from there, let's add our first effect. So yeah, I guess we'll do the scan line first. So we just add another component called scan line. And we look at why it's complaining. Oh, I think I just added an extra cap there. I think our import as well. This is why you always read the docs first before you bother trying to guess. Yeah, so this is what it should be. I think it actually might require these props here. So let's add this as well. We'll import this blend function from the other post-processing library. Oh, it is actually working. We're going to add that anyways. So we'll do a blend function. And this will be helpful just to show you what the blend function does. If you use any video editing tools or Photoshop or anything, a blend function is kind of like, like the add or subtract or overlay, the blend modes. That's what this is. So if I add a blend function prop here, can grab one from this list and see what I mean. These are basically all the ones that you would have if you were in Photoshop. So you'd have color dodge, color burn, average, alpha, difference, all these different options. And you really just gotta experiment with these to see what looks good to you. I'll try darken first. That actually looks kind of cool. It's a little intense, but we can actually bring that down by adjusting the opacity. So there's also an opacity prop. We can make it a lot more subtle doing that. And then there's also a prop called density, which kind of controls the width of the space between the lines and the lines themselves. So if I do like 1, it looks like this. 0.1, it's like very wide. I think I kind of like it to be around, let's say like 0.8 maybe. Yeah, we'll go with that for now. You can always play around with it later. So that's how you do scan lines. Looking back at our sample, we have some other stuff going on here, and I'll just tell you what they are now, so you can do away with the mystery. But the other ones that we're using are noise. So this guy here. And we are using the glitch. And we're using Flume and Vignette. And then the final look that we get is just about the order that those post-processing effects are in, because the pipeline is really like the first effect gets past the original frame, the one that didn't have any post-processing effects, as like all the pixels. And then each effect is a shader. So they're going to take in the input of the pixels and then return some new pixels with the effect applied. And so then the next effect in the pipeline gets past the results of the previous one. And so the order it goes in actually sort of changes the look. For example, if I put the glitch first, like then you would have scan lines going through the glitch. And if I put it after, I might not. Yeah, you're just going to get different effects depending on the order. Okay, so we got the scan line. Let's do the noise. The noise one is pretty simple. And I'm going to use my automatic import again. Remember, if you hit tab right now, it's going to auto import it. And then this also has an opacity. I think all of them might have an opacity actually. I'll do 0.1 here. The cool thing about the noise is that it is animated, so it looks pretty cool. If I go way up, it looks like that. It actually is kind of neat. Leave it at 0.5 for now. Really don't know how to fine tune these until the end. So. All right, so that is coming along nicely. The next one we should do is the bloom effect. Bloom is a really cool one just for getting sort of like a glow, like as if the screen is emitting light. And bloom has quite a few properties. Let's go back and look at a list of them just to get some idea of what's available to us. We have the intensity, and then we have something called a kernel size, luminance threshold, raise this value to mask out darker elements. So this will kind of exclude dark things in the scene so that they don't glow. Just makes things look better. And like in this example, like the white text is glowing and the green text is glowing and this image is glowing more than the background, which is good. So we're just actually going to use a couple of these. We're going to use luminance, threshold, and I'm just going to add 0 for the moment. What is this unhappy about? Nope, I didn't import it properly. All right, so that's not quite there yet. Next, let's add luminance smoothing. Let's make that like 0.9. And honestly, when I first choose these values, I'm kind of just guessing. I don't really know exactly what the result's going to be. Once I get just any number in there, I'll usually go and try a bunch of different values and see what happens. And that's how I figure out what to finally use in the end. We can give this an intensity, and let's also set a radius. And once we have those in there, one way to figure out what they do is just to turn them way up and see what happens. Sometimes nothing really happens. And then you know that it's not actually that important for your particular use cases. A lot of times, the effect that one particular value has depends on the settings for the other things. So that one has a lot of effect. So when you go up really high, you get really bright there. I think I kind of liked 2. 3 is not bad either, but somewhere in that range, 2 to 3 or something like that. Show you what the luminance threshold does. In my case, nothing is particularly luminant actually, so 0 is probably fine. In fact, honestly, you might not even, well, yeah, I guess you do need to set that. So you want to have this set to 0. The default is actually probably something that is higher than 0, which is why it causes the effect to go away. All right, so bloom, we'll leave it 0. And then finally, let's add the glitch. Like the glitch is the kind of the crazy over the top one. It's like almost too much even, but it's just so cool. So if you put it in with just the default, you'll notice that it's intermittent, which means it kind of happens every once in a while. It's also very like small, blocky glitches, like just things changing. I liked this final effect I ended up with where you get these really big blocks just because it sort of makes the black area of the screen a little cooler looking, more interesting. And I don't know, I just think it looks cool when the image kind of pops up over here. So let's see if we can recreate the settings that I used to make that happen. And if we're going to succeed at that, we're going to need to go look at the stuff here. So first off, we have something called a delay. We have something called a duration, something called a strength. We have a mode, active, and a ratio. So this is really interesting. There's something called a weak glitch and a strong glitch. I think the strong glitches are what results in the bigger effects, but I'm not sure. And we have these settings, which are the min and the max glitch strength. So I think these are the ones that we're really going to need to play around with. So let's start there. Let's first go and set a strength value. We saw that that's an array. So if we're going to match what we want. Let's see first off what happens if we just make this all 0. And then, you know what, I'm also going to do this. I'm going to set the mode right now. The mode is how you tell it if you want it to be intermittent or if it's kind of like consistent. So let's do constant mild. We don't need it to be too crazy. Okay, so this is what we get when we have strength 0, 0. I'm going to try doing like 0, 1, and then 0, 2. So these are both really small numbers. That's kind of interesting. And then let's see what else we can play around with. This ratio, I think, would be interesting to mess with. So I'm actually going to try using this default here and see what that does. I want to refresh just to make sure. All right, I think that's okay. I'm noticing that my background here is a lot stronger than I really want it to be. So let's see if we can fix that. If we go back to the ai.png and look at this opacity setting here, see if we can bring that down. One thing we could do too is actually add a vignette to the screen. So a vignette is another effect that you can put inside the EffectComposer, and that'll make the edges of the screen just like darker than the center of the screen, which I think is kind of cool. So let's try using the defaults from the docs. Put that right here. And make sure that we import it, of course. And once this reloads, should see a little difference. I don't think it's going to make that big of a difference. It's just kind of like a subtle change we're going to get. Okay, and then I'll just turn down the opacity a bit more. Nice, so that works for me. One final thing before we wrap up, I wanted to show you how to change the font on these text components. Just because of how easy and useful it is, I literally just need to set a font prop on this and give it a path to a font. So since we already uploaded a few here, you just put in the file name and save it. And that's it, done. So then for like all the other ones, we could maybe use, instead of using the bold, we could use light. It just gives you a ton of control. I'm gonna actually still use bold for the name, but maybe do light for, I don't know, what do you think if we use light for the bio portion? I think that would look better. So we just go down here, light. Yeah, I think that looks better. All right, so that's it. That's all there is to setting the font. It's really, really easy. You could pretty much design anything you can imagine using this text component. And I think this is pretty pretty good. Let's see what happens when we do the whole thing together. All right, so let's bring it all up full screen. Our loader looks kind of cool there. And it looks like everything is working. All right, so that's the whole tutorial. Sorry that we didn't really talk about the post-processing effects till the very end, but I really think that's the coolest part of this little project is just like all of the things you can do by combining the small set of effects that are already built into Three.js and then exposed in these React post-processing components. Where things get really exciting though is when you start learning to write your own shaders, you can plug them into a custom component and just mix them into these effect pipelines. And it's just so cool and so easy. I do want to do a project with that soon, so keep your eyes out on the channel. I should have something relatively soon. I know sometimes it takes a while between videos. It's a lot of work to come up with these projects and then do them and then record the video. So hopefully it'll be pretty soon. Try not to wait too long. Thanks for watching and have a great day. Bye.